So let's look at 10 tips for writing deep POV. Firstly, know everything about your character. Or as I think Monday's blog post said, build a rich interior life for your character. What do we mean by this? Remember that definition way back at the beginning of the webinar that said that viewpoint is your opinions and your judgments. This is very much what you want to be sharing of your character. You want to share their opinions on life, their attitudes, their judgments on things. What is their worldview? How do they react to situations? What emotions do they attach to other characters and to events? How have their past experiences shaped their reactions and their attitudes? So you need to know all of this about your character, because then you can really make that a rich interior life and make it all about their response to the world. Now, I'd like to refer you back to that excerpt I read from The Great Gatsby at the beginning. Even though that was from in first person, from the narrator's point of view, it was really just a recitation of, we went to the pool, effectively we saw the body floating on the mattress in the pool. When we were carrying the body back to the house, that was when we saw the second body. There was no real emotion to that. We have no idea what the narrator was thinking, what they were feeling about these discoveries. It's actually quite distancing. Now, Fitzgerald is actually a master at storytelling, but that is just one example of, and there's actually often a very good reason when you want to place distance between the reader and the character. But if you are trying to write in deep POV, then that kind of just they did this and then they did this and then they saw this is going to feel very distant from the character. Secondly, limit your character's knowledge. If you are inside your character's head, then you can only know, and the reader can only know, what your character knows. This is why sometimes if you have multiple POVs, you might let slip something in one character's point of view that another character doesn't know. So now there's a secret and the reader is in on the secret. However, one of the advantages of writing, for example, in only one character's point of view is that you can keep a whole lot of secrets, because all the reader has got to go on is the viewpoint character's view of the world. What the viewpoint character guesses about other people's motives. We don't actually know the other character's motives. We have to deduce from the reactions what is going on. So watch for how they introduce and identify other characters, what they do and don't have knowledge of. For example, if your character is only finished elementary or primary school and never went to, or let's say never went to college, would they know all about European medieval history? You need to think very carefully, is this something my character would know? If your character is a ditzy blonde, does she know how to change the tire on her car? On the other hand, it could be rather nice and surprising that she does know, and she's actually a semi-skilled mechanic in her own right. But then that needs to be part of the character. If it's not part of your character's experience, your character can't know it. But you can use their limited knowledge to create mystery or to intrigue the reader. So this is a great way to create suspense by only showing us what this character knows, by having them wonder, what is that person's motive? Why did that person say that thing to me? Now the reader is also engaged and going, what's up with that other character? So limiting what characters know also makes them more realistic. As I think it was Billy who said earlier, or as we said earlier, it's more authentic because we in real life only know what we know. We only view the world through our own viewpoint. So therefore, when we're in a book where we also have this limited view of the world and we can only see through the character, it just somehow gels with us. We all get that. Avoid passive voice. Passive voice is when action happens to the subject of the sentence, making the subject passive. I'm not going to go into the heavy detail on how to write passive voice, etc. You're welcome to go off and Google if you're not entirely sure. But an example, this is often used in business speak. The contract was signed by the foreman. The foreman is not the subject of the sentence. The contract is and it's being acted upon by the foreman. So the contract is actually being passive. And if you were to rewrite that in a more active voice, you would change the subject around and you would make the subject the active person. So you would say, the foreman signed the contract. So if you're wanting to write in very deep POV, try and avoid writing in passive voice. The next one, remove filter words. And if we have time at the end of the session, I have got a little exercise, or if anybody wants to hang around a bit longer afterwards, I've got a little exercise that shows you filter words. Now, filter words are: he realized, she noticed, he saw, they heard, they thought. These words remind the reader that there is a narrator telling us what the character saw, heard, thought, realized, noticed, observed, deduced, whatever those filter words are. When I did a showing and telling showing versus telling webinar last year, I actually distributed a list of these filter words, and I'm sure we could probably make it available again. But these filter words, as I say, are a reminder that there is a narrator telling us the story. So you want to remove them. And as I say, I'll give you an example later. But here's a quick answer. So a quick example. Her eyes watered as she realized just how much she'd missed that smile. In a deep POV, you'd rewrite that sentence as, her eyes watered. Holy Moses, she'd missed that smile. So we've taken out the words as she realized and gone straight into her head, her thought. Holy Moses, she'd missed that smile. Can you see how much more intense and how much more emotional it is by just taking out those filter words and moving us directly into the character's thoughts? So while this is very much, as I say, linked into showing versus telling, we did a whole webinar on it last year. While there are moments in our books when telling is necessary, familiarize yourself with these filter words. In fact, even keep a list handy beside your desk when you're writing. And the minute you hit one of them, just look at how you can rewrite the sentence in a more active and engaging way. The next tip, use sensory detail. Use all 5 senses to enable the reader to live into the scene and experience it along with the characters. For those of you doing the group coaching, when we get to scene setting and description in a few weeks' time, you will we'll handle this in a greater detail. But avoid lengthy descriptions. Rather use small details to paint a vivid picture. A sense of smell, the sense of lemon-scented air if you're in Italy, in a lemon grove, is going to be so much more powerful than saying that there were 10 trees and they were green and they had lemons on them and it was whatever season. And just little sensory details can really bring a story to life, because again, that is how we experience life. Most of us have the ability to sense through all 5 senses. So add colors and texture to your writing. Don't just stick to the obvious ones of hearing, dialogue, and seeing, which is the action. Next, tip number 6, use dialogue to share information, but reduce those dialogue tags. So what do we mean by use dialogue to share information? Well, instead of giving a big info dump in the character's head or just a whole bunch of information, having characters talk about it makes it far more feel far more relevant. And I'd like to add something here that, in fact, the blog post on Monday really covered very well. And I highly recommend you go to the blog and read Monday's blog post. But in that post, it said, fit the language to the person. Because if you are now writing in deep POV, you're effectively writing in the character's voice, not your own voice. So you need to think about what distinctive tone and style or voice that character would have. Again, this is why I say this is high-level writing. This is really... we don't expect everybody to achieve this on their first book. In fact, it would be a miracle if we could do this. For me, it's taken multiple books to get to the point where I can now write really into a deeper POV. The other thing is using dialogue tags, again, just reminds the reader that there is a narrator telling us a story. So if you've got lots of, for example, pleased to meet you, Jane said, holding out her hand. There's nothing wrong with that sentence, but if we just wrote it as pleased to meet you, Jane held out her hand. The action tag now tells us that Jane is the one saying those words, and just dropping out the Jane said makes it that much more keeps us more inside the character's head. Also, all those fancy dialogue tags, retorted, opined, whined, rejoined, verified, stated, those kind of fancy tags will definitely remind a reader, hey, this is an author being fancy. Because in real life, we don't usually think, my colleague opined to me, my colleague retorted. We tend to think in terms of said. So-and-so said this to me. So-and-so asked that question. So keep it simple and preferably try and use action tags rather than dialogue tags where you can.